everybody. We got a great one today, for a change, because my guest is Catherine Rampell. You may know Catherine from her Washington Post column or her previous visits on our show. Plus, you'll be seeing more of Catherine soon when she starts co-hosting MSNBC's The Weekend, which will be in prime time. We recorded this immediately after Trump's Rose Garden speech announcing his new tariff regime. So this is an historic conversation. I'm essentially asking Catherine to explain what we had just heard on the fly. But just for clarity's sake, Trump has put steep tariffs on nearly every country in the world, which will cost Americans at least a couple $1,000s a year each. It will adversely affect low and middle income Americans far more than high income Americans, who will get a giant tax break. There. Before we go into my discussion with Catherine, I want to talk to you about the special election in Wisconsin. It was a very important win for the state Supreme Court. Judge Susan Crawford was elected by a 10% margin. Now, Elon Musk put $20 million in the efforts to support the ultra-conservative candidate, but Wisconsin voters across the state came out and voted to elect Crawford. That's because Democrats turned out and shifted the margins statewide when compared to Trump's narrow victory there in November. After Crawford's win, Musk commented that he, quote, expected to lose, which I guess is why he put only $20 million into the race. At least he's accepted the results and isn't spreading election hoax lies. Still, we should celebrate Crawford's victory. With it, the liberal justices maintain a 4-3 majority and will be able to ungerrymander the state's congressional map. Wisconsin has 8 congressional districts and is basically a 50-50 state, so you'd think they'd have 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats in the House, but currently it's 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats. A fairer map will, in all likelihood, allow Democrats to pick up a seat or 2, or maybe more, in 2026. The court will also be able to change the state's abortion law, which currently prohibits abortion with the exception for life of the mother. So this was a big victory. The next day, Trump said that Musk would be leaving soon, but White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that won't be, quote, until his incredible work at DOGE is complete, and she wasn't being sarcastic. Oh, and the stock market crashed in an immediate reaction to Trump's tariff speech. Well, we've got a great one today, for a change. Catherine Rampell on tariffs, DOGE, and the economy. Catherine Rampell, what happened?
Trump just finished speaking in the Rose Garden to announce his Liberation Day agenda, in which he is liberating Americans from their money, it seems. But I am still scrambling to figure out what it actually means.
Okay.
And maybe between the time we record this podcast and it is distributed in a few days, there will be some clarity, but I wouldn't bet on that.
Let me ask you something. I mean, I'm listening to him speak and during this, and I'm going like, I can't tell whether this is complete bullshit or if it's and a couple of things he said just struck me as, okay, that's a lie. He said that
Just a couple?
Yeah, that's why I need you, because once he said that Biden had the highest inflation in the history of the country. And
yeah, not true.
Not true. And then he said that they won't cut Medicaid benefits, which
it depends on whether you believe in the laws of arithmetic or not. And, not everybody does. So,
well, basically the House voted to cut it in half, right?
The House voted to order the committee that basically decides how much money goes to Medicaid to cut the things in their purview by so much money that they would have to cut some of Medicaid, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually literally say, like, take this money away from Medicaid. But again, arithmetic suggests that they will have no choice but to cut money from Medicaid, among the other things that they appropriate funds for. So it's this like weird ledger de math that's going on here where they claim, oh, we haven't said anything about Medicaid, but they've basically set the constraints for themselves such that they would have to put it on the chopping block. That's sort of how it works. But they're saying, oh, there's nothing in this or whatever the resolution. We don't use the word Medicaid. Ha ha ha. But at some point, they're going to have to actually like produce the budget itself. And yes, it will include cuts to Medicaid.
I believe him when he says we're not going to cut Social Security, because he's actually said we will not cut Social Security. And the Republicans haven't said they were going to do that in Congress, or haven't voted to do that. So I had just two things that just jumped out at me like, Jesus Christ, how do you say that? Did you have any
I don't
others?
know. I mean, I'm sure like every other word out of his mouth was some kind of distortion or cherry picking. That like just like general things about people are ripping us off. Like they're selling us stuff. We are buying the stuff at low prices or reasonable prices, and he would be making it more expensive. So I don't know in what universe that's ripping us off. So like there are things like that, and then other stuff about this is going to bring back jobs. So which it's not.
Now, how do you know that? How do you know that this isn't going to just be a boom for American workers?
So a few reasons. One is that one is that in his first term he did a baby version of some of this stuff, which at the time seemed like gigantic and disruptive, right? He had tariffs on lots of other products, but not like globally. Like in what Trump has announced today is that there will be a global, it sounds like 10% minimum tariff, but that a lot of other countries are going to have much higher tariffs. So, like
And one of those is China.
China, 34%. I'm looking at my list or what was in his QVC style billboard that he held up. South Korea, 25%, EU, 20%, Vietnam, 46. Anyway, so he did smaller versions of this last time. It did not increase employment in the United States.
He kept saying we've never done this before. This is the first time we've done, and he had done it before, some
Well,
version of this.
he had imposed tariffs. He had waged trade wars. Again, by comparison, those trade wars were more like trade battles, I guess, than trade wars per
But the
se.
numbers here are of a different.
Yes, yeah, it's just a totally different scale. But, he did this before, it did not improve employment. And beyond that, like he's tariffing a lot of the stuff that US manufacturers need to make their own products, which means that their costs are going to go up. So
Right.
just as an example, like he had people come on stage from the UAW about how this is going to be great for auto industries and auto workers, and no, 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 no. If we are tariffing the inputs for automobiles
Because many car parts are made in Mexico and in Canada and
and
elsewhere.
elsewhere, right? So, there are Toyota factories in the United States where they assemble cars, they make cars, but they get parts from Japan. Same thing, I think there are BMW plants in the US, but they get engines from Germany. So, those are just a couple of examples, but more generally, the issue is that the auto industry, the auto supply chain in North America, so US, Canada, and Mexico, is really integrated over borders, and parts might cross borders 6 or 7 times or more than that.
And does the tariff get collected on each time, or is it at the end product?
So he didn't clarify today. Based on other stuff he has said in the past, it sounds like it would be a new incursion of the tariff every time it, it crosses the border. We don't know. Maybe he'll change his mind again.
So something, a piece of equipment in a motor that
Hmm.
that they're making, putting together in Detroit, will go from Canada to Detroit, and there'll be a tariff on that. And
Every
then when it
time.
goes back inside the motor to Canada, they'll charge it again.
That is my understanding of how this would work. Again, based on other things that the administration has put out in the past, that they wouldn't rebate back the tariff if it crosses multiple times. The previous tariff, it's like every time it re enters the United States, it would be another 25% or whatever.
Biden kept some of Trump's tariffs, right?
Yeah. He either kept them or swapped them out for other kinds of trade barriers, like a quota. So Trump put in place steel and aluminum tariffs, for example, back in, I want to say 2018, and Biden kept them around or introduced voluntary import quotas with specific countries.
I mean, is it kosher to put on tariffs if China is shipping us stuff for under the price? In other words, they have a surplus of steel because they've overbuilt the place and they can't use the steel, so they send it to us at a lower price. Then we can put a tariff on them, right? I mean, then it makes sense.
So what you're talking about, I think, is dumping, which
Yes,
has a
that's right.
specific
There
idea.
you go.
Yeah,
Of course, I know that. I'm from Minnesota, where we have a big iron ore business, so steel is very important to Minnesota. So
and dumping.
when they were dumping steel, that's when we put tariffs on
Yeah. So
their steel that they were
there
dumping.
is a process for that, and you're supposed to actually prove that they're selling below cost. Now, my feeling is, like, basically every administration going back, I want to say at least to the 90s, maybe to the 80s, has put some new tariffs on steel. This is not a Trump specific thing or even a Biden specific thing. Like, there's always some steel tariffs because the steel industry pulls at the heartstrings of the administration or whatever. The problem is that it doesn't seem to have actually served the steel industry well,
Hmm.
whether it's because of, the pretext is dumping or something else. And in fact, that's part of the reason why US Steel put itself up for sale, because they, in being shielded from international competition repeatedly over the years by multiple administrations, they like never did the upgrades that they needed to become as productive as their competitors abroad, or even their like some of the upstart. There are a bunch of these, they call them mini mills in the United States, that have developed like much more productive technologies for producing
Much
steel.
more efficient.
Right, exactly. And so when you shield some of these companies from competition, you might be doing them a favor in the short run, but in the long run, they never do the adaptations that they need to do. And so that's a different way to look at all of this, which is like, if you want to help the industry and if you want to help its workers, maybe you should not just say we're going to make everybody else more expensive for a little while so that you can keep doing exactly what you're doing and not be hurt by it. And the other thing to consider in all of this is that in the United States there are a lot more downstream companies that use steel than companies that produce steel.
Sure.
So, like, I think the estimates that I had seen last time around when we were talking about, when Trump implemented steel tariffs, were that there were like 70 to 80 jobs that were at companies that depended on buying steel for every one job at a steel company. So maybe you're helping some mill in Minnesota that is in like the iron ore business or whatever,
Right.
but you're also probably hurting. I don't know if there's like a lot of auto plants in Minnesota or appliance manufacturers, but all of those jobs downstream are hurt.
Let me ask you. So, are are we going to be retaliated against?
Yes. We haven't even yeah, exactly. It's like, not only will a lot of US industry be hurt because Trump is making their inputs, their intermediate goods, their parts more expensive, but also all of these other countries, or at least enough of our significant trading partners, have said they're not going to just like lie down and take it. They're going to target our industries too for retaliation. And by the way, they are much smarter and more sophisticated about which industries they target. Like, Trump is just like, sure, tariffs across the board. That sounds fun. I'm a tariff man. I'm going to tariff everything. And meanwhile, you have other countries say, let's look at what products are most politically sensitive in the United States.
Well, let's
Oh,
talk about agricultural products like
yeah,
soybeans,
soybeans, Florida orange juice, um,
corn.
K- corn, Kentucky bourbon, Kentucky peanut butter. That was another one that I had seen on some of these lists. Harley Davidson motorcycles. Like, they're just much more precise about how they fight back, and it hurts. Look, it's that's going to be bad for their economies too. It's going to be bad for our economy. Basically, when you start a trade war, you just make everybody poorer. That is the net result. You'll get some shifting of some manufacturing activity, probably not to the US. Like last time around, Vietnam was the big winner when we tariffed China. That production did not move to the United
Right.
States. It moved to other countries that became, by comparison, more competitive.
That makes
Uh,
sense.
so you get some shifting of production, but I'm not even sure you'll get that much because, like, who knows how much staying power these tariffs will have. If you're deciding to build a new factory, that's like a multi-year, potentially multi-decade investment decision. And if Trump is changing the tariff rates from day to day, from country to country, minute to minute, he's making these changes. It seems. Why would you do any long-term planning around that? Probably for now, you're just going to say, "I'm going to do nothing." Like, I'm going to see how this shakes out, and that's what companies have been doing, and that's part of the reason why you see the manufacturing industry not doing so well the past few months, and orders dropping because nobody knows what the rules of the road are and how to adapt to them.
And won't the rules of the road change when other countries respond to
Yes.
these? So there could be an accelerated pace to increasing tariffs by China responds to us, then we respond back to China. I mean, are these going to be? Is he keeping these at 10% or?
I don't even know if that's true since he spoke 30 minutes ago, you know? So I wish I could tell you, but I don't think he knows. All the reporting from the past few days was that the people around him didn't know what the plan was going to be as late as last night. I'm still not even sure, based on what he announced just now, which again was at whatever 4 something on Wednesday, 4 p.m. something on Wednesday in the Rose Garden. I don't even understand how all of this will work from what he described. Maybe there'll be a fact sheet or something that comes out soon, but it's going to cause a lot of confusion, and there'll be responses from other countries. And if you look at just what the futures market, Trump just coincidentally made this announcement after stock markets closed for the day, but the futures market, when I last looked at it, tanked as expected because these tariffs are like way worse even than they had been signposting in the past few days. Maybe he'll walk them back. I don't know. Like, he seems somewhat responsive to markets, but the problem is he doesn't seem to know what his own objectives are, right? Is it about pressuring countries on fentanyl or immigration or
He
some
didn't
other
mention
thing?
fentanyl at all.
Well, Mexico and Canada were not part of this today, but, like, is this about some non-trade related objective? Is it about trying to help our exporters, which again won't work if they're facing retaliatory tariffs from the countries that we're targeting? Is it about raising revenue? He's also said, like, "Oh, we're just going to use all these tariffs to raise a bunch of revenue, and then we can cut other kinds of taxes."
Now, to be sure, to just be clarify, uh, a tariff, we pay the tariff when the importer pays the tariff.
So the importer is the party that actually, like, remits the tariff to the government. Now the question is, where does that cost go? Like, does the importer then pass along that cost to the wholesaler or the retailer, and then the retailer passes it on to consumers? Does the importer just, like, eat the cost and have a smaller margin?
Or as a combination of it, they'll eat half of it and
Right.
etc.
And usually there'll be some combination. It'll depend a lot depending on what the product is. And how competitive the market is and like how much they're willing to negotiate with trading partners. Like I had seen something recently, I think the Journal reported that Walmart executives were pressuring their Chinese factories or whoever they were, their
Suppliers.
the suppliers exactly, to cut their prices to make up for the increased price that Walmart was eventually having to pay, by importing it because of the tariff. And then, like, the Walmart CEOs got hauled into the principal's office in China and yelled at by
Hmm.
some Chinese officials and saying, "Don't you dare make your suppliers pay this cost. Like, this is not our fault. This is Trump's fault. You guys have to eat the cost." And so it'll be some combination. If you look at what happened last time, again, first Trump term, Trump did a bunch of, like, he did tariffs on China, he did tariffs on specific products, steel, aluminum, washing machines. Basically, every study done on each of those tariffs found that most or all of the cost of the tariffs were paid by Americans, not by the foreign countries.
In terms of how increased prices.
Exactly, the price is being passed along. So Americans might not only mean consumers, it might mean the small businesses or whatever. Maybe they were eating it through smaller margins, but it's not like that has no effect. Like that means that maybe they don't have the money to invest to hire whatever. So this they will have costs. This is not free.
Is this going to be a trade war?
I mean, I think it already is.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
it already is. Yeah.
Define my terms. What does that mean? These countries are going to respond to what we do.
Right. A bunch of countries have already said that they're responding. So we jack up tariffs, they jack up tariffs higher as well. Maybe Trump gets angered by that and decides to raise his tariffs even higher. And the expression an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. That's where you're headed. And we have seen this happen before. It's it's so frustrating to me. Trump talks about his trade policy as if like no one has been smart enough or brave enough to have tried this before. And it took Donald Trump.
That was the narrative today.
Yes. Except that's bull. Like, we have done this before. It's just and it was disastrous, and it's just we haven't been dumb enough to do it again. Like, if you've seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, yeah?
Yes. Anybody?
Okay.
Anybody?
Yes. Do you remember what they were talking about
Was
in
it
that
Smoot
scene?
Hawley?
It was.
Yes.
Although
That's.
I think Ben Stein calls it Holly Smoot in the clip, but
Uh-huh.
whatever. Most people know it as Smoot Hawley. Smoot Hawley is the nickname for this bill that passed in 1930. Shortly after we went into recession in the United States.
It's sometimes credited with the Depression, Smoot Hawley.
Exactly. That Smoot-Hawley jacked up tariffs here in the US. It led to retaliatory measures elsewhere, and you end up in this global trade war that again makes everybody poorer and is thought to have been at least a major contributor from turning what was then a recession into a prolonged Great Depression. Like, we saw this happen before. And in fact, there's a letter that was published, some public petition from like 1,000 economists at the time, basically saying all the things that economists are saying now, like, please don't do this. This is such a bad idea, and they did it anyway. And again, we lived with the consequences and learned from them, I hope, or some people did. But Donald Trump is like, "Hey, how come nobody's ever thought of this?" And we're going through the same thing again. And look, I really hope it's not as bad as what we saw in the 1930s. I'm not predicting that that will be the specific outcome. I hope at the very least, Trump looks at the markets and it's like, whoa, maybe this was a bad idea. But I don't know.
Well, he's stubborn, so he's not going to, in a week be going like, that turned out to be a bad idea.
Well, he did suspend the tariffs on Mexico and Canada a couple of
That's
times.
true.
Right.
But this was this is worldwide, this thing.
Yeah. So it's worse. um, and there are economists in the White House, like some people with fancy degrees, who definitely know better, and I imagine are telling him this is a really dumb idea and you need to find an off ramp. But I don't know if they're reaching him, and I don't know if he would listen.
So we're probably starting a trade war right now.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way.
I want to ask you a little bit about Elon Musk. You wrote a piece about DOGE a few weeks ago that was sort of about just the chaos that these cuts are creating.
Under the guise of greater efficiency, right? DOGE stands for Department of Government Efficiency. They are making the federal government almost comically inefficient. And it's not like it was like a super well-oiled machine before, don't get me wrong. A lot of administrative bloat and waste in government. I agree with that. But it's not like they actually consulted with anybody to see how the government works to try to figure out how to make it work better.
It seems like that is the case, that
Yeah, not seems.
they've
It
created
is.
chaos and that they've fired the wrong people and then
They
rehired them.
Yeah, they're like, some of the anecdotes are very well known, like they fired the nuclear inspectors and then we're like, "Oops," and then they couldn't figure out how to find them again. They fired the bird flu experts and then tried to rehire them. There's a lot of that, but there's a lot of other, like, equally dumb, petty stuff, including, making it impossible for various agencies and departments to, like, buy equipment.
So if you're a surveyor,
Right. So, like, if you're at the Bureau of Land Management
mhm,
and your job is to work as a federal surveyor, where you're figuring out like where property lines end and whatnot, and you're on some remote site and your equipment dies, your shovel breaks or whatever, you can't just go to the local hardware store, if there is one, and buy a new shovel. You have to shut down the entire project, track down one of the handful of people nationwide who is authorized to like file a federal procurement form, wait for that shovel to come in,
mhm.
and in the meantime, the work stops and the workers are idle. And that's just one example.
The FDA lost their LexisNexis.
Yeah,
Should explain what now you get LexisNexis
yeah.
at the
Well,
post, right?
yes.
And it's
So
cool. I've had it. I've paid for it once when I was researching books and stuff like that.
yeah, it's a reference tool. And in the case of the FDA, they need it to look up like the history of different regulations to figure out what interacts with what or what the intent was or something like that. It's like library research. They basically can't do basic library research that they need to do their jobs. But I'm not even sure that they've noticed because they're too busy looking for toilet paper because not only are they like losing access to the tools they need, I don't know if they fired the custodial staff or they forgot or they're not allowed to buy more toilet paper or whatever, but I've heard multiple reports from employees at FDA, which just had its own round of layoffs this week. So this was before then, that the bathrooms are all running out of toilet paper. And like they're busy trying to track down more toilet paper, which incidentally was also a thing that happened at Twitter
Hmm.
after Elon Musk bought Twitter, now X, that like there were all of these
Fool
complaints.
me once.
Yeah, so I don't even know if this was an accident. I assume a lot of what's happening and a lot of the disruption is just they don't care how much chaos they cause, but maybe this was like deliberate psychological warfare on employees. I don't know.
That is what it feels like to me, that they don't care.
Yeah. Or like, okay, so you know how they have to do these stupid 5 bullet points of things that I
Sure.
I achieved last week, and they have to do this every Monday, right? At the IRS, a lot of the workers don't have their own computers because the IRS has crappy IT. DOGE also fired all of the IT modernization people, by the way. That's this whole separate thing. The IRS desperately needs to, like, they got this cash infusion under
Now
Biden.
they've laid off a lot of people at IRS, right?
Correct.
And
Correct.
didn't a few years ago Congress pass extra funding so that and to get people with expertise on high income
Yeah.
tax returns, and that was about raising more money.
Yeah, so under the Inflation Reduction Act, which was, what year was that? I don't know, 2022, 2023. I'm losing track of
One of
time.
those.
Yep. Under Biden, it did a bunch of things, but they gave the IRS $80 billion for improving customer service, like having more people answer the phone, modernizing their IT, which, if I actually visited an IRS service center, and I was astonished at like how much paper they use. They're using like software from the disco era. Like they didn't have scanners. They had people literally, like, if you mail in your tax return, which some Americans still do, they didn't have a way of scanning the tax returns to put them in the system. They would have somebody like henpecking at a computer, manually keystroke by keystroke, writing in the numbers that you had for your entries. Anyway, it was
And this
terrible.
is from equipment.
Yeah, it's just like their software, their technology's super old, and they know it, and they've been trying to get money, but it's been very hard for them to actually make the investments given how much Congress had been cutting their funding. Anyway, and then the third bucket was essentially for greater enforcement so that they could not be so outgunned when they're auditing Donald Trump's tax return, for example, or any complex partnerships, things like that. Because it's easy and quick basically to audit a poor person's tax return to see if they're improperly claiming the EITC. And so,
Right. So more of those are done than
right,
on very,
exactly.
very high income people who use complex.
Right, exactly. Where they have armies of accountants and tax attorneys to help them plan. And it's really complicated to figure out when they're cheating or non compliant, as the IRS likes to put it. And there's a lot more money at stake than like the small dollars you get from a poor person who gets audited, even if the poor person misrepresented their income. So, whatever. So they were supposed to do enforcement. They were supposed to invest in enforcement, particularly enforcement of these more complex returns for wealthy individuals, corporations, partnerships, things like that.
And this was going to bring hundreds of billions of extra dollars into
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
coffers.
Every dollar that the IRS invests in more enforcement brings in a lot more money in return. Particularly, they find a Donald Trump. If they have the resources to go after these people, it's a lot of money at stake.
So the latest I saw was that they will be taking in a lot less money
Correct.
because of the layoffs.
Well, but it's all 3 buckets seem well, even before Trump came into office, Republicans in Congress had been clawing back some of that money that had been
Hmm.
appropriated under the Inflation Reduction Act, and DOGE has been laying off the new people hired for enforcement. They disbanded the IT modernization part of it, and they fired people who answer the phones. And where I was going before, for customer service, where I was going before about this 5 bullet point thing is that because not every employee at IRS has their own computer, because they have crappy IT, like some of them are just using a red pen and like circling things on
That's
paper.
so insane.
What's happening is people are lining up on Mondays when the 5 bullet points are due to use the shared computers. And so they're stuck in this queue all day, and they're not doing their actual work, right? This was like a common theme that I've heard from civil servants across agencies and departments, that there's so much stupid busy work that they now have to do, like the 5 bullet points emails, or having to get permission from the secretary himself or herself before they can do like very routine work, such as renewing a contract for like the severe weather alerts at NOAA. Like, this is a real thing. This is a real contract that I think has already lapsed or is about to lapse.
Are they going to privatize NOAA? Are they going to actually try to go for a privatized weather service? And
They've talked about it. And
Mhm.
certainly that's laid out in Project 2025,
Right.
which once upon a time Trump said was not the boilerplate, the blueprint or whatever for his administration, but has clearly proven to be. I think there's a lot of interest in privatizing parts of government that were not privatized, but I feel like that's only part of the story. Even parts of government that have been privatized already, because there was like a privatization push, you probably remember, under George W. Bush. even those things that have already been contracted out, DOGE has been killing. So, like, for example, the Department of Education collects a lot of data. They have kind of two jobs. One is the student loan portfolio, or the Department of Education, I guess, rest in peace, what it used to be.
Mm-mm.
They have their student loan portfolio that they manage, and then they also measure how well kids can read and stuff like that, right? They produce a lot of statistics.
So who's all that work going to go to? I mean,
It had been contracted out.
mhm.
They had contracts with, these different, like, consulting firms that conducted the surveys and analyzed the data. Can the kids read? Can they do the math, And then producing best practices for how do you help kids with special needs do well in school. Like, that's the kind of stuff that the Department of Education has been publishing, but they don't actually compile it themselves. It gets contracted out to private firms, and all of those contracts have been canceled.
Is that by Doge?
Yes, by DOGE. This
Okay.
happened like a month ago. It got almost no attention.
Hmm.
So, that kind of cuts against the, oh, they're just trying to privatize stuff. I think the better way to characterize it is they are not, it's not some like that they're trying to fulfill some libertarian dream of the government, just all of the functions of government get done by the private sector. It's really about where the contracts go to. It's not that they want these things to be contracted out, these basic government functions to be contracted out, whether it's the weather service or anything else. It's that they want that business to go to their friends.
Right.
There are a lot of government contractors right now, probably too many. Again, there's lots of bloat in government and in government contracts, government procurement.
Do you get the feeling that they're taking care in the way they do this, or basically, you laugh?
I knew
Uh,
you were a comedian, but you're really on your game today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, no, it seems like as long as we're doing this job, we might as well do it well. Is there any of that?
No, I have seen no evidence of that. Again, there are longtime good government groups out there. Like, there's this organization called the Partnership for Public Service. They're best known for, if anybody has heard of them, there's this, like, unsung hero type group. They produce these awards every year for, like, the best civil servants. They're called the Sammys. I forget what it stands
Hmm.
for. They're named for some model civil servant, where it's like they find, like, the person at NIH who helped develop the COVID vaccine or whatever. And then they, like, have awards for people who are not usually recognized. But they also do a lot of work figuring out how to train civil servants and, like, make government more efficient. And how do we actually, like, there are problems with government, including that it is hard to fire people who are low performers. Every organization has low performers, and in government it is hard to get rid of the people who are not pulling their weight, and to reward the people who are especially meritorious.
And it seems now that what's going on lately is that they're firing
Everyone,
everyone.
or at least indiscriminately. It's totally
That's
arbitrary.
indiscriminately.
Yeah, it's not like they're consulting with the managers and saying, like, who are the good people on your team, who are the bad people on your team. They're like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Like,
Or who were the
you,
last ones hired? We're going to get rid of
yes,
them.
because they're the easiest to fire. So my point is that places like the Partnership for Public Service, they have these off the shelf plans for, here's how we would fix government. Like, if anybody's shown any interest in this, here's a plan.
Mm.
Here's a plan for improving the IT, not just at the IRS, but lots of other agencies that have horrific software and, like, are susceptible to cyber risks and whatever else. There are people who have thought about this. Those are not the people who are being consulted. It's these 19-year-olds, with the nickname Big Balls, or who have worked for, like, hacking groups in some cases, or for the Russians, who are just deciding, I don't know, this, like, doesn't seem like the most useful thing. We're going to cut all of these people. Or, to some extent, it's probably related to what is a more politically sensitive area. So, for example, I mentioned FDA had a bunch of layoffs this week, really all of
And that's
HHS.
that you want to really lay off people at food and drug. at Food and Drug Administration because what they do is not very
Mhm.
important.
Yeah, they had layoffs across HHS, the Health and Human Services Department, which includes the FDA, it includes the CDC, the NIH, and other, function. It's like the LIHEAP, which is the program. I forget what it stands for, but it's
Yeah,
like,
it's heating for
yeah,
people in
it's
their homes,
right.
especially for older people or poor people,
Right,
right?
right, exactly. They provide support so that people don't freeze to death in the winter. That is in HHS for some reason, and they laid off all the people who work on LIHEAP. So I don't know what happens next winter, you know, when people still presumably are dealing with severe weather and need financial assistance so that they can adequately heat their homes. Those people are just gone. People who work on Head Start, that's also in HHS for whatever reason. So there are a lot of these functions that have been cut.
That wasn't in education, Head Start.
No,
Wow. Okay.
Head Start is part of like the I don't know. But there are a bunch of things in the government that make no sense. I agree with that. There are probably ways to streamline it. Again, there are people who have thought quite in depth about how to
All
do
of
that.
us.
None of them are being consulted. So some of this just seems totally random and arbitrary. Some of it, there are some patterns. So, like, for example, the group in CDC and the group in the FDA that both deal with like tobacco and smoking, they've been either disbanded or decimated. And it's like, oh, that seems not a coincidence that they're going after the people who are like monitoring tobacco risk or enforcing actions against like tobacco companies that are whatever they're breaking the law. They're both of those groups have been kneecapped. Probably that's not a coincidence, but who knows? The government is being, excuse me, DOGE in particular is being so non-transparent about who they're culling, who they're firing, that it's really hard to know what's going on.
That seems so irresponsible and selfish. I mean, Gore, he tried to get the scale down the government when he was the vice president over 8 years, right?
Yeah.
And he was successful. Part of the reason he was successful was that the Cold War ended and we could get rid of people in the Defense Department. But it seemed like that there was tremendous amount of care taken, and not that Musk actually feels like he has it in for people and just thinks it's funny. I mean, that's what
Yes. Well, and
the
he said like,
buzzsaw is
"Oh,
about.
right, yes." He or the chainsaw, right?
Chainsaw.
Like the
That's right.
gold-plated chainsaw. And he said, "Oh, well, if we make a mistake and we fire the Ebola people, like we can just hire them back." First of all, he hasn't hired them back. He has fired the Ebola people. So that specific example,
First of all, he hasn't hired them
yeah,
back.
that specific example is wrong. But second of all, a lot of these things, like, even if you realize your mistake and you try to undo it, the damage may already be done, right? So I mentioned before that there are these contracts at NOAA for like maintaining the radio alerts if if there's severe weather, if
Yeah,
there's
NOAA takes
tornadoes.
care of our keeps track of our weather. That's what NOAA does. I mean, a big part of what it does.
Right. Yes, they produce data for the weather. They have like the hurricane hunters who go out and figure out the path of the hurricane and like,
And they're located all over the country so that they can report on the weather all over the country. And they have satellites and the whole
yes.
9 yards.
So my understanding is that there's some maintenance contract to maintain the hurricane hunters, which are these specialized, I don't know, vessels, like there's ships and whatever, aircraft of some kind. I don't know enough about it, but I know that there are maintenance contracts that are lapsing or have already lapsed to just do the basic maintenance work on those, as well as the tornado alerts and everything else. And it's like, okay, you can try, well, first of all, if you let the contract lapse rather than just renewing it, and which normally would have taken a few hours from the whatever procurement officer, contracting officer at NOAA. If you let it lapse, then by law you have to like put it up for bid again. It's going to be a months long process. And so like by the time you realize you've made your mistake, like it'll take a long time to fix it. And stuff breaks down in the meantime, right? And it becomes harder and more expensive to fix. And that's just a simple thing that nobody would really know about, but everybody relies on NOAA for weather alerts, for just the apps on their phones to figure out what's going on, whether it's going to rain today. And they're laying off scientists and they're letting these contracts lapse. And maybe DOGE will belatedly realize this was a dumb idea, but by the time they do, it's gotten very expensive and potentially people's lives have been put at risk because they didn't get the tornado siren or whatever. Nobody was there to to fix whatever the equipment
And
was.
they keep track. They look for tsunamis and they
Yeah, yeah,
those kind of things.
it's so dumb. It's so dumb.
And NOAA is, I think, the biggest part of the Commerce Department.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how big they are relative to the other agencies at Commerce. Commerce has a lot of these statistical agencies. They house Census, the Bureau of Economic Analysis. I think NIST is in Commerce. So a lot of the people at Commerce, like despite the name, it's really more like the Department of Statistics, and all of that stuff is is also under threat. And I've written about that too, that they're like trying to cook the books on a lot of
In
their
Social
delete.
Security, now they're saying that people have to come into the office instead of
Yes.
calling,
Yeah.
which is
Again,
insane.
how is this more efficient? How is this more efficient? You're requiring people who might have to drive hours to wait in line at an office to do basic routine stuff that they might have otherwise been able to do over the phone.
And these
Meanwhile,
people are old too.
they're older, they may have mobility problems. They're also the government or DOGE is also closing some of these Social Security field offices, which means they're funneling more Americans to these offices that have less capacity to deal with the public and to help the public. There was a story recently, and I think it was in the Seattle Times, about a person who was wrongly declared dead.
Hmm. And he was sent to prison in El Salvador.
He was not. Uh, that's other unfortunate human beings
Which
who
is
we are treating like
unbelievable.
garbage. Yes, that's a separate crisis. But this guy is like he gets this letter saying he's been declared dead. The money is clawed back out of his bank account that he has been receiving from Social Security, and they won't help him on the phone, and he has to go to an office. And just imagine that, orders of magnitude worse, that more and more people are going to have to, like, if there's a screw up, or if you need to start your benefits, let's say, which lots of people do every year, now you have to wait, you have to drive somewhere, you have to wait in line, hope that the office can serve you, and meanwhile, the people who work there are getting laid off. So none of this is efficient. Ostensibly, again, this is all under the cover of making government more efficient, but it's not. It's like they're taking their chainsaw to random parts of the government or parts of the government that they don't like. They are presumably trying to direct more business to their friends or to themselves in the case of Elon Musk. And none of this is in the service of the general public or taxpayers.
Yeah, they're not cutting SpaceX or,
No.
you know.
No, they're buying more Teslas.
So when will we understand what happened, what the president just talked about today?
On tariffs?
Yeah.
I don't know. As I said, I strongly suspect that the after hours trading reaction in the market may chasten them, and maybe they'll try to walk things back tomorrow, which would be Thursday. But I don't know.
That seems unlikely because that's admitting error and defeat, isn't it?
Well, like I said, Trump has suspended or delayed tariffs on Mexico and Canada
Canada,
a
yeah.
couple of times, and he found some fig leaf, right, where like he ostensibly he was going after Canada because of immigration and fentanyl initially.
And fentanyl is not.
Not an issue. No, we have more fentanyl going over from the data that's available. We have more fentanyl going in the opposite direction from the U.S. to Canada than from Canada
Oh,
to the U.S. But the Prime Minister of Canada said we're going to appoint a fentanyl czar, and all which who cares? And by the way, we're investing all of this new money in border security, money that had been announced, I don't know, back in November or December of last year before Trump took office. But it was enough of a fig leaf that Trump was like, see, I got them to do what I wanted. In
I
reality,
see.
probably the Canadians like rolled Trump. but but they were able to save face, and Trump was able to claim his victory. He's really good at repackaging the status quo as a victory. Like he'll say, aha, I got them to invest money in the border, except they were going to do it anyway. But then he proclaims victory and moves on. So maybe there's an opportunity to do that. I mean, he's picking fights with so many different countries at once. I don't even know what that would look like. But maybe the EU will say, "Oh, Trump, we love you so much, and you're right. We've taken advantage of you. So therefore, we're going to stop taking advantage of Americans by, I don't know, allowing more Trump properties or so. I have no idea, but um,
Uh-huh.
but maybe there's some there again. I think everybody's probably going to be looking for an off ramp, but I don't know because Trump clearly believes incoherent things about tariffs, like what their objective is and what concessions he's trying to wring out of these other countries. Maybe he'll be satisfied by some of them, but I don't know that he's getting good advice or the good advice is reaching him. So who knows?
We'll see these developments in the days ahead and the weeks ahead and the months ahead. And
Yep.
thank you for helping us on just right off of the president finishing his speech, starting this. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Hopefully, some of this will still be relevant by the time your audience out there hears it, or we could have a totally different set of trade wars and concerns by then.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.